What if the moment that changes someone's entire NASCAR story has nothing to do with winning or losing? That question has been sitting at the center of every conversation about Cleetus McFarland since a specific moment at Rockingham became the most talked about clip in NASCAR circles recently. Not a victory. Not a podium finish. A save, a split-second, instinct-driven recovery on worn tires, deep into a grueling test day, in exactly the kind of scenario where inexperienced drivers tend to get exposed. And the garage noticed. Before we get into what actually happened and why it matters more than the highlight clip suggests, understand that this story is not just about one driver. It's about a sport trying to figure out where its boundaries are, who gets access to its highest levels, and what the evidence actually looks like when a controversial entry starts showing something real. For viewers who are newer to this story, Cleetus McFarland is a YouTube personality who built one of the most loyal automotive followings on the internet, millions of subscribers, a passionate fan base, and a brand built entirely around horsepower, personality, and genuine enthusiasm for motorsport. But enthusiasm and a YouTube channel don't automatically earn you a seat in professional stock car racing, and that tension has defined every chapter of his NASCAR journey so far. His path into the sport began with the ARCA Menard Series, which served as his formal introduction to oval racing at a competitive level. From there, he stepped up to the NASCAR Truck Series, and that move triggered a response from inside the sport that went far beyond the usual skepticism toward celebrity entries. The buzz was real, but so was the backlash. Early on, the red flag started stacking up. A crash during testing raised eyebrows. His Daytona truck debut produced an incident that handed critics exactly the kind of ammunition they were looking for. These weren't minor moments, they were visible, documented, and widely discussed inside and outside the garage. The criticism that followed wasn't just random noise from frustrated fans. Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, and Kyle Busch, three of the most respected and experienced voices in NASCAR, raised genuine concerns about experience gaps and competitive readiness. Their position wasn't built on personal dislike. It was built on the reality that NASCAR at its highest levels is physically demanding, technically complex, and genuinely dangerous. The experience gap between a YouTube personality and a driver who has spent years climbing the development ladder is not a minor detail. It's a fundamental question of preparation. That's why every single session Cleetus enters now carries a weight that most drivers at his level simply don't face. Every test day, every practice run, every qualifying lap is being watched, analyzed, and measured against a standard set partly by his own early mistakes and partly by the very public doubts of veteran professionals. The test day at Rockingham was not a casual afternoon. By the time the moment in question occurred, Cleetus had been behind the wheel for nearly 10 hours. That kind of duration is physically punishing in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate from the outside. Stock car racing demands sustained concentration, physical endurance, and the ability to make precise inputs at high speed even as the body fatigues. Toward the end of a session that long, mental sharpness erodes. Physical responses slow slightly. And the car itself is in its worst condition. Tires that have been run hard over many laps lose grip progressively, and by the end of a long run, the handling characteristics of the car are dramatically different from what they were at the start. That is exactly the scenario Cleetus was dealing with. Late in a long run, tires completely cooked, grip nearly gone, the car snapped loose mid-corner. For casual fans, snapping loose means the rear of the car broke free, creating a sudden rotation that, if not caught immediately and correctly, results in a spin, and at Rockingham, a spin can mean wall contact, damage, and in the worst cases, injury. For inexperienced drivers, this is the moment that almost always gets them. The correction required is not intuitive. Overcorrect and you create a secondary snap in the opposite direction, which is frequently more dangerous than the original event. Freeze and the car goes where physics dictates, which is usually not where you want to be. Cleetus did neither. Quick hands, a measured response, no overcorrection, and the car was gathered back under control. He carried on. What makes this specific moment significant is the context: same track, same driver, completely different outcome compared to his earlier crash at Rockingham. That contrast is not a small detail. It suggests that something in his relationship with the car, with the limit, and with the pressure of the moment has genuinely shifted. The save was not performed in a controlled, low-stress scenario. It happened at the end of an exhausting day, on degraded rubber, in the exact conditions where the gap between preparation and unpreparedness tends to become visible most brutally. Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, and Kyle Busch raised concerns about Cleetus McFarland's presence in the sport. Their concerns centered on experience, competitive readiness, and the standards that professional racing demands. It is important to be direct about this, their criticism was not baseless. The experience gap was real and documented. The early incidents gave their concerns visible, factual support. One strong recovery moment at a test session does not erase that record or instantly reverse those positions, and to suggest otherwise would be doing a disservice to the seriousness of their original concerns. But something subtle has shifted in how the conversation is framed. Before Rockingham, the dominant question was whether Cleetus belonged in NASCAR competition at all. That is a binary question with a hard edge to it. After Rockingham, the question being asked in certain corners of the garage is different, it's whether he can be consistent. That is not the same question. Consistency is a developmental challenge. Belonging is a fundamental qualification. The shift from one to the other is not loud or dramatic, but in the NASCAR garage, where respect is earned quietly and through accumulated evidence rather than single moments, it matters. For veteran voices to genuinely soften their stance, the evidence required goes beyond a single test session save. What the sports insiders tend to respond to is sustained performance, clean races, consistent lap times, staying out of avoidable incidents over a period of time that allows for a real evaluation of capability rather than a snapshot. One Rockingham save does not constitute a body of evidence. But it contributes to one, and that is how credibility in this environment gets built. Once the clip from Rockingham circulated online, the reaction divided along the lines you might expect, but the nature of the division itself was notable. One camp pointed to the save as visible, concrete proof of progress, particularly when placed alongside his earlier crash at the same track. The argument was straightforward: the same driver, the same venue, a measurably better outcome. That is evidence of development, not just optimism. The opposing camp countered just as directly: a single moment does not rewrite a resume that includes real mistakes and a limited competitive record at this level. Their position was that the save was genuine but insufficient, that one instinctive recovery doesn't answer the larger questions about whether Cleetus can perform consistently over the course of a full race weekend, manage traffic, execute strategy, and avoid the kind of contact that defines whether a driver is truly ready for the level they are competing at. Both positions are defensible, and that's actually the point. Cleetus McFarland is a genuinely polarizing figure in the NASCAR fan base, not because of personality alone, but because of what his path into the sport represents. He entered through a route that is fundamentally different from the traditional development ladder. He brings a massive, engaged audience with him, casual fans who followed his YouTube content and are now watching Xfinity Series races they might never have considered before. That audience expansion has real value to a sport that is actively trying to grow its footprint. But it creates a legitimate tension with drivers who spent years in late models, regional series, and lower-tier national competition earning their way up, often with far less financial backing and public attention. What is worth noting is that the conversation itself has evolved. A few months ago, the dominant tone was dismissal. Now the fan base is having a more nuanced argument about evidence and standards. That shift, even without a race result to anchor it, represents a change in the story. The Xfinity Series debut at Rockingham on April 4 is no longer just a scheduled race entry. Given everything that has built up around this story, it has become a defining moment, not just for Cleetus McFarland's NASCAR future, but for the narrative itself. The difference between a test session and an actual race is fundamental. Testing happens in controlled conditions, with the ability to pit freely, adjust the car, and manage your own program. Racing happens in traffic, under pressure, with consequences for every mistake. The margin for error shrinks significantly. A good result at Rockingham on April 4 does not require a top 5 finish or a shock performance. What a good result looks like in practical terms is a clean car at the end of the race, consistent lap times through the race distance, staying out of avoidable incidents, and demonstrating the kind of composure under pressure that translates directly from what was visible in the test session save. That's not a low bar in racing terms, it is exactly the baseline that separates professional competitors from drivers who are still finding their footing. A bad result, by contrast, carries a specific weight here. If the Xfinity debut ends in avoidable contact, a spin, or a failure to manage the demands of racing in traffic, the save from Rockingham becomes a footnote rather than a turning point. It becomes a moment that pointed toward something that didn't materialize, rather than the beginning of a genuine developmental arc. The stakes for the RCR partnership are real as well. The organization has invested resources and credibility in this entry, and the race result will be read as part of that investment's early return. Rockingham as a venue carries specific meaning for this entire story. It was the site of the earlier crash. It was the site of the recovery. On April 4th, it becomes the site of the first real test, with a full field, full race distance, and no controlled conditions to fall back on. The track itself has become central to how this story is being told. Cleetus McFarland's path into NASCAR is part of a conversation the sport has been having with increasing urgency about access, audience growth, and competitive integrity. The tension is real. NASCAR benefits from the audience crossover that celebrity and social media-connected entries bring. Fans who never watched a stock car race have tuned in because of this story. That has tangible value in a media landscape where every sport is competing for attention. But that value is conditional. It depends entirely on whether the driver placed in competition can actually perform at the level required. A celebrity entry that results in repeated incidents, avoidable contact, and a pattern of underpreparation undermines the competitive standards that veteran drivers and teams have built their careers around. The sport cannot have it both ways. It cannot market the excitement of crossover stories while ignoring the responsibility that comes with placing those drivers on tracks with professionals who are competing for points, money, and careers. What happens on April 4th won't just say something about Cleetus McFarland. It will say something about how NASCAR manages these crossover entries going forward, whether the sport has a framework for evaluating readiness that goes beyond entertainment value, and whether a driver who entered through an unconventional path can earn standing in the sport on merit rather than platform size alone. This is exactly the kind of NASCAR story that reminds you why the sport commands attention, real stakes, genuine uncertainty, and a narrative with no predetermined outcome. The Rockingham save is either the beginning of something real, or it's a single compelling moment in a story that doesn't go where the highlights suggested. April 4th answers that question. If you want to be part of this conversation as it develops, subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report, honest NASCAR coverage built for fans who actually follow the sport. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think the Rockingham save is genuine evidence of progress, or is the resume still too thin to change the conversation? Both sides have a case, and we want to hear yours. Hit the like button if this breakdown gave you something real to think about. Every like and every subscriber helps build this community into something worth being part of. All eyes on April 4th.